Section 1. Ancient Roots, the Seeds of Democracy, written by John Oliver from HBO. Democracy, it's a system of government where people get to decide, who's in charge. It's not perfect like what is, but it's definitely better than the alternatives. Now we're going to go back in time, way back to ancient Greece and Rome. These guys, they were onto something. In ancient Athens, they had this thing called direct democracy. Imagine that. Every citizen got to vote on every single issue. It was messy, it was chaotic, but it was democracy in its purest form. Now, over in Rome, they were a little more organized. They had a representative democracy, with elected officials making decisions on behalf of the people. Sound familiar? These early experiments in democracy, they weren't perfect, not even close. For example, women and slaves, they didn't get a say. But still, these ancient civilizations, they planted the seeds for what would become a global movement. Think about it, for centuries, democracy was just this idea, this radical notion, and yet, here we are today. Democracy, it's the most prevalent form of government in the world. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. But hold on, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's not forget the Dark Ages. Democracy, it took a bit of a nap for a while there. But don't worry, it comes back, and when it does, it comes back swinging. So, the Dark Ages, not exactly known for their democratic values. But hey, even in the darkest of times, there's always a flicker of hope. Enter the Magna Carta. This document, signed by King John of England in 1215, it was a big deal. Why? Because it established the principle that even the king, he wasn't above the law. Now, the Magna Carta, it wasn't about democracy as we know it today. It was more about limiting the power of the king and protecting the rights of the nobility. But still, it was a step in the right direction. It established the idea that power should be limited, that rights should be protected, and that even kings, they have to follow the rules. The Magna Carta, it was a landmark document, no doubt about it, but it was really just the beginning, the real turning point, the moment when democracy really started to gain some traction. That came centuries later with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, it was like a giant wake-up call for Europe. Thinkers, philosophers, they were challenging the old ways of doing things. They were questioning authority, demanding reason and logic. And they were talking about this radical new idea, individual rights. John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu, these guys, they were the rock stars of the Enlightenment. They argued that governments should be based on the consent of the governed. They believed in natural rights, like the right to life, liberty, and property. And they championed the separation of powers, checks and balances, to prevent tyranny. These ideas, they were revolutionary, literally. The American and French revolutions, they were directly inspired by Enlightenment ideals. And these revolutions, they shook the world. They showed that it was possible to overthrow oppressive regimes and establish governments based on the will of the people. Section 4. Revolutions and Rights, the Spread of Democratic Ideals. The American Revolution, it wasn't just about dumping tea in the harbor. It was about throwing off the yoke of British rule and creating a new nation, a nation founded on the principles of liberty and self-government. The Declaration of Independence, with its bold proclamation that all men are created equal, it was a shot heard around the world. And then came the French Revolution. It was messier, bloodier, but no less significant. The French, they took the Enlightenment ideals to heart, and they were willing to fight for them, literally. They stormed the Bastille, they overthrew the monarchy, and they established a republic. These revolutions, they were messy, they were chaotic, but they were also transformative. They inspired people all over the world to fight for their own freedom and to demand a say in their own government. Section 5. The Suffrage Movement, a voice for women. For centuries, democracy had one major flaw. It was mostly for men. Women, they were denied the right to vote, to own property, to have a say in their own lives. But in the 19th century, that began to change, thanks to the courage and determination of the women's suffrage movement. These women, they faced ridicule, they faced imprisonment, but they never gave up. They organized, they protested, they lobbied, and slowly but surely, they started to win over public opinion. Finally, in 1920, the United States passed the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. Other countries soon followed suit, and while the fight for women's equality is far from over, the suffrage movement marked a major victory for democracy. Section 6. The Global March of Democracy, Post-War Expansion. The 20th century was a time of great upheaval, with 2 world wars and the rise and fall of ideologies like fascism and communism. But amidst all the chaos, democracy continued to gain ground. After World War II, there was a wave of decolonization as former colonies gained their independence, and many of these newly independent nations, they chose democracy as their form of government. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, it marked the end of the Cold War and the beginning of a new era of democratic expansion. Countries in Eastern Europe, they transitioned from communist rule to democracy. The spread of democracy, it wasn't always smooth or easy. There were setbacks, there were challenges, and there are still many parts of the world where democracy is under threat. But overall, the 20th century witnessed a remarkable expansion of democracy around the globe. Section 7. Democracy in the Digital Age, Challenges and Opportunities. So here we are in the 21st century, the digital age. Technology, it's changing everything, including how we participate in democracy. The internet, social media, they've created new opportunities for civic engagement. People can connect with each other, they can organize protests, they can hold their elected officials accountable, all with a few taps on their smartphones. But with these new opportunities come new challenges. Disinformation, online propaganda, foreign interference in elections. These are all very real threats to democracy in the digital age. So what's the future of democracy? That's the million-dollar question. But one thing's for sure, democracy, it's not something we can take for granted. It requires constant vigilance, constant engagement, and a willingness to defend it against those who would seek to undermine it. If you enjoyed this journey through the history of democracy, make sure to subscribe to Map My Saga and share this video with your friends. Let's keep the conversation going.